It is time. We finished the first half, and now we have to start the second. I was not blind to the Great Ace Attorney 1. I saw a Let's Play of it before, but I am now completely new to the Great Ace Attorney 2. I heard that the Great Ace Attorney 2 was a huge improvement on the first game, and not only that, I also heard that it was one of the best games in the series. Despite this, I kept my expectations down because I know how it feels for a game to get hyped up and not meet those expectations. I'm excited for this one because it's one of the only games in the series that I'm reviewing soon after I play the game for the first time. Obviously, I'm still going to look at each case twice in order to make sure I review them properly, but you know what I mean. I still have my first playthrough fresh in my head, so I can describe how I felt when playing the game for the first time. When first playing the game, I liked all 5 cases. None of them were top 10 cases, but none of them were bad either. Every case in this game were close in quality. For me, the Great Ace Attorney 1 had the higher highs and the lower lows, while this game was consistently good from the beginning to the end. Because of its consistency, I regarded the Great Ace Attorney 2 as a better game than its predecessor. Let's see if that holds up after I go through each case in depth. I also have a lot to say, so let's jump right into it. The game opens up with a beautiful scene of Susato standing in front of a grave, and some awesome voice acting where she narrates what's happening. We see Jezebel Brett dead, and it's a great way to hook the player since we already get an answer to one of our questions from the first game. And we also learn that we're going to play as Susato, which is awesome, and we get to see this beautiful background for episode 1 with Susato and Rei. The game makes a really good first impression in terms of presentation, and in my opinion, it looks much better than any Ace Attorney game that came before it. We also have a really funny and unique premise for the first case. Susato is disguised as a guy. As we learned in the first game, women were forbidden in the Japanese courtroom, so if Susato wanted to defend Rei, she had to disguise herself. I want to give Susato's character design here a big thumbs up because I saw this character design before, and I did not realize it was Susato. I just thought it was some random guy, so very good job with the design. Getting into the courtroom, I like how Susato looks very nervous, just like Ryunosuke did with his first trial. Her experience parallels his a lot, which is a really funny way to get back into the game. They also take the unique premise with Susato's disguise and actually do some interesting things with it, which is good. She overplays her act as a man, and even characters like Rei start to slip up about Susato's identity, and it makes the trial even more dramatic as it scares the player into thinking that Susato might be found out. We also have the Return of Aoji and a fun little story going on with him. He has to fight another rookie for a trial involving Jezebel Brett, and is using this trial to redeem his reputation, and his hair is used as a symbol of growth, which is really funny. Again, I want to point out how beautiful the setting of the crime is. The beach area just looks amazing, and I promise I won't be talking about the visuals too much in the later episodes. I just really think they stand out in this first case, so that's why I'm giving it credit here. Now let's get into the mystery. I really love how you get a lot of information to work with right away. You see that the victim has a pen in her hand, she has some wound on her back, a drink is spilled on the floor, and there's a tiny opening in the back of the hut. There's just so much for you to look at right away, and that got me really invested in the mystery. We also got 2 characters from Adventures as witnesses, which is another really good way to get the player invested. Soseki especially is interesting because we get to see how he changes when he's in Japan. He's a lot more confident than he was back in London, so it's a good way of further showing how difficult it was for Soseki to live in that environment. I also really like the use of Manimemo's character design as a form of deduction that the player can use. Immediately the ink stain is noticeable to the player, but something that's more cleverly hidden is the emblem on his arm that matches the emblem on his pen. One part I didn't like about the mystery was how we didn't prove that someone stabbed Jezebel Brett from outside the cabin. We proved it was a possibility, and then Manimemo just admits he did the stabbing when he really didn't need to. The way we make the deduction was from Soseki remembering that Jezebel Brett pointed behind her to signal who killed her. That alone isn't sufficient, and Soseki even says his memories of what happened aren't very clear, and isn't sure if the victim was pointing to the defendant or pointing somewhere else. But honestly, that's it. That's the only big problem I have with the case. That may shock some of you, but I think this case is really solid all around. It borrows so many elements from the Adventure of the Great Departure, but drastically improves on every aspect. I mean, you might have some minor problems here and there, like it's not explained how Manimemo slipped the poison into Jezebel's drink, I mean, I guess you're just supposed to believe that she wasn't paying attention at some point, but it does seem kind of contrived. Like this random reporter has to go to your drink, and he takes out a pen and starts slipping poison into it without you realizing it. Again, it's possible, but it's a bit too contrived, but I don't care too much, it's not a huge issue in the grand scheme of things. Like, in any case, I think it's a lot better than the multiple contrivances in case 1 of Adventures. I also think this case did a better job of justifying a more complex murder than its Adventures counterpart. What I mean by that is the reason that Manny Memo stabbed Giselle. Manny Memo could have stopped the crime with poisoning, but he also decided to stab her. The reason he does this is because he realized that the poison has a noticeable effect on the victim's eyes, and he thought the poison might link back to him because he was one of the people that visited the lab. Considering the fact that he also may have realized his pen was at the crime scene, and it could have been seen as a method of transporting the poison, I don't think it's crazy to believe that he would stab Giselle in the moment to disguise his previous crime in some way. Again, in any sense, I think it's infinitely better than Giselle's plan in case 1, where she poisons the victim and then fires the gunshot at him and complicates the crime for no reason. And that's not the only thing, there's so many things that are improved between like these first cases. Like, this is definitely, no question in my mind, just easily the better first case. Like, let's look at the pacing. They made the case a lot more dense. It's shorter, but it has a lot more cross-examinations, evidence prompts, and word prompts, which makes the gameplay a lot more abundant. As a result, it didn't have the same problem where I was constantly waiting for a new cross-examination because I was so bored. And let's compare the structure of the gameplay itself. One of my biggest gripes with the Great Ace Attorney 1 was its over-reliance on pressing. Oftentimes, the game falls into a common pattern of pressing statements, some testimony being added, and then presenting evidence on the added statement. But not only that, you also have the witness reaction mechanic. This added nothing from a gameplay standpoint until case 5. The witness makes a noise, and then you click on the witness, and there we go, we have more testimony, or we get a new piece of evidence and the case progresses. These mechanics make the gameplay boring because it doesn't feel like I'm deducing anything. I just keep pressing A once I finally get the new statement, and then it's pretty obvious as to what I need to present. Also, the pressing dialogue is really damn long. These witnesses go on talking forever, and all of these factors combined make some of the cases really slow. Case 1 in Game 1 was a big offender of this, and it's why I didn't enjoy that case. However, I am happy to say they learned from their mistakes. The Great Ace Attorney 2 fixes this by having a better balance between presenting and pressing. There are several testimonies where you can present evidence right away. This kept me on my toes as it felt like I actually had to pay attention and had to make deductions. Instant presenting also speeds up the case, which makes it more concise. Thank you Great Ace Attorney 2 for going back to this style of gameplay. I also think the writing in general was a lot more fun in this case. Hosonaga was a comical witness with his turtle disguise, and he was still as fun as ever with his desire for justice and his commitment to his work. As I mentioned before, Soseki's changes in personality added more to his character, and I did enjoy the dynamic between Rei and Susato at times, and I did like moments from Rei where she created panic. For example, when she calls Susato by her name in like the first 5 minutes of court. These rash moments from Rei were a great way to create small moments of suspense. I also liked Manny Memo. Understandably, he's frustrated at the courts for letting Giselle Brett get special treatment despite her crimes. Manny Memo's frustration does a good job of rebuilding the idea that England has Japan in its control and shows how corrupt the legal system is. I also do like his realization that his actions may have been wrong. Manny Memo claims to do everything for the sake of justice. Honestly, he's quite similar to Hosonaga with his sense of justice and his dedication to his occupation. He claims to have killed Giselle Brett for the sake of justice, and while some may find that to be heroic, at the end of the day, his actions are very selfish. His rage at Giselle is what leads to the killing, and he was about to get an innocent sentence for his crime. I wouldn't say he's on the same level as Giselle Brett as the game claims, but it's clear to see why the game thinks Manny Memo is in the wrong. So yeah, overall, I think we have a great cast of characters. I also love the parts of this episode that are outside of the courtroom, and I find them to be better than the actual trial. Don't get me wrong, the trial is fantastic. The mystery is great, and the dialogue is fun. But it is true that parts of the trial can feel a bit normal at times, and what's funny is, that's not the case when you go outside of the courtroom. I was constantly entertained. Prior to the trial, we see Cosmo's grave, we get the reveal that Jezelbrett's dead, and we learn about the entire setup of the case. These are fantastic moments as they make you ask a lot of questions. However, my favorite part of the case has to be the ending. I mean, first, let's talk about the over-the-top breakdown scene where Susato and Rei toss Memo into the air. At this point, I didn't really know what was happening, but I found it very funny. But then, we get something even better. This scene with Aoji has to be one of the greatest scenes in Ace Attorney history. This had me dying of laughter for many reasons. I mean, the whole thing is so dramatic. Aoji has this moment where it looks like he's about to say his last words, and then the way his hair just fades away is beautiful. I love how they use the sad Cosmo music, like this is some important part in the story, and then we got literally everyone just having a moment of silence for Aoji's hair, and the entire thing is hysterical. But then we step outside of the courtroom, and we get a crazy reveal from Memo himself. We really get to see how far Memo goes in the pursuit of the truth, as he escapes from the bailiffs and tries to get the truth out of Eugene Mikotoba. Memo reveals that no one in Japan knows the truth about Cosmo's death, and Eugene is silent about the matter, which builds more mystery onto Cosmo's character and his role in the story. We also finally get some type of response as to a question we had from the beginning of the case. Why is Mikotoba completely fine? Susato was called back to Japan because her dad was supposedly ill, but he's completely fine, so Susato deduces that there's probably something that her dad wanted to stop her from discovering back in Britain. Combined with the knowledge of Saseki's conversation with Eugene, Susato deduces that this important thing that Eugene is trying to hide is linked to the second case with Soseki. That leaves the player with more intrigue because in Adventures, we only had one case involving Soseki, but it's clear that we've had many moments that made the Gyarados apartment very strange. I listed many strange moments that were unresolved from the Adventures of the Cloud Kokoro, and there's also some foreshadowing of the second case in this game. Soseki said Poison was an old enemy of his, and that doesn't really make sense to the player because he was never involved in a poisoning case to our knowledge. With all of this build up, it made me really excited to play Case 2, the Memoirs of the Clouded Kokoro. But before we get there, why don't we give this case a rating? Now I realize for some cases, it is hard to rate them, so I think what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna give a range. I'm gonna give a range for some of these cases, and for this one, this might surprise you, but I'm giving this a high 8.5 to a low 9, and I'm leaning towards that low 9. So 9 out of 10, that is really good. And it may not sound like it, from just how I talked about the case. I probably didn't sound super enthusiastic about it, but that's just because I'm trying to save my voice. I don't want my voice to go away. But yeah, this case, this is an excellent case. It's especially fantastic for an intro case. Like, for some reason, I'm not a huge fan of intro cases in the series. I'm not quite sure what it is, but I find a lot of them to be problematic or uninteresting. But this case is a perfect example on how you can make an intro case so fun. It has so much comedy, the premise is fun, the characters are fun. I mean, literally all the returning characters, just seeing them again, that makes the case fun. And it's just so concise. They do this all in this short amount of time. And it's kind of crazy because I didn't feel so high about this the first time I played this. I said that none of the cases were like top 10. Nah, I definitely put this in my top 10 and probably even my top 5. Like, all the characters are fun, no character is a weak point. I think one thing that might have confused me in my first playthrough was if the mystery was tight. And I think overall it really was. There's that one major convenience, but I think that's fine. It's just one thing. It's okay. It's not that bad in the grand scheme of things. And again, I love seeing Susato in this lawyer spot, and the humor around her pretending to be Ryunosuke's male cousin was super good. Her dad also added to that. He was a fun assistant character, just calling out how Susato's so nervous and all of that. It is so good. There's barely a dull moment. It's just 3 hours of constant fun. I don't know how I can't give that, an 8.5 or a 9. It has to be high. And again, if you look at the negatives, well, there's not much there. There's really no negative. There's one negative point I had. Nothing else. Everything about the case is just super solid. So yeah, that's my review of the case. We're starting really well. And next time, we will take a flashback to the past with the memoirs of the Clouded Kokoro. See you guys then.